watching on the boss page?
Yeah, I'm doing so now because I have to share it to my personal page after.
All right, guys, we're live. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are, whenever you're listening to this. We're here, and we're with Mr. Wayne Nichols. And Mr. Wayne Nichols is a retired police officer, 19 years?
Nearly 18.
18 years. And we're going to talk about the sensible, prudent things one could do to stay safe, especially with regard to break-ins. Maybe we even have time to look at other crimes. But our goal here is to kind of share all this wisdom and knowledge with you on a regular and ongoing basis. Maybe it's every Saturday at 9 a.m. We don't know. But Wayne, go ahead. Tell us a little more about yourself.
Well, thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Elaine. I'm excited to be here. My name is Wayne Nichols. I recently retired from the Henderson Police Department in 2020. And so I've got nearly 18 years of law enforcement experience. Throughout my career, I worked various positions, obviously starting at the patrol level and then working my way up to an investigator / detective, where I worked internet crimes against children investigations, robberies, homicides, home invasion, so various crimes that I've worked throughout the years. And so, James, I got to give you kudos. You and I have talked, before this, and I think the attendees today or those who watch in the future are in for a real treat, because you and I have kind of talked about the goal of, BOSS security screens being more than just a product, but really the encompassing the importance of security and, being safe, being mindful. It doesn't cost you anything, right? So I'm excited to network with the both of you. So once again, thank you so much for having me.
There's a bunch of chainsawing being done right outside the home at the moment. And, it's across the street, the neighbors. But let's just start with that. Let's say, someone's chainsawing right through my front door. Maybe that's never happened. We've seen it in the movies. But if it were to happen, what do I do?
Boy, right off the bat, you got a good one. Well, this is not a horror movie, because if it was, most people will run upstairs or to a closet and lock themselves in. Obviously, if somebody is trying to force their way into your home, I think one of the first things that really should be a thought is, if something were to happen in my home, right? We talk about, I've got kids, right? So even the thought process of if a fire broke out or, some type of traumatic incident occurred, what do? Do you get out of the house? Do you stay in the house? I do think it differs for, every situation. Obviously, a fire, you want to get out of the house. How do you get out of the house? How fast can you get out of the house? If you've got somebody trying to, invade your home, breach your home, exiting the home may not be something ideal. But I do think what is important is, obviously, do you have a cell phone nearby? Everybody today, pretty much sleeps right next to their cell phone, if not with it in their hand, as I tell my kids. So it's really important, right? Not necessarily doing a practice session or a practice run as to what you would do, but absolutely, being able to call the police if you've got kids in the home, being able to alert them. And it's really a case-by-case basis. Sometimes, I live in a 2-story home. So if I were to, exit my home in the traditional sense, I have to walk downstairs, right? So that might be, nerve-wracking, even for me. I think about if somebody were to, be inside of my home, right? The stakes have certainly been elevated. Do I confront that person? Do I have the means to protect myself, whether it's a weapon, or do I grab my kids and shelter in place? Do I lock my door? Do I yell? Sometimes the question is the answer. And the question that I have for the attendees today is, what would you do in that situation? And have you sort of, began to prepare that mental awareness if it could happen? And obviously, there's a lot of great products out there that can secure your home. Of course, shout out to BOSS Security Screens as well. But in reality, there's far more other considerations than somebody just breaking into your home. And so I'm excited to share those tips as well today.
Yeah, so I really like what you're saying, which is we got to plan for these things. We got to prepare for it. And whether we're individuals or we have a family, especially with a family, they may be at a loss about what they should do. We, as kids, I remember in school, we'd do fire alarms all the time, right? All right, let's line up. Or we even used to do, and this will show my age, is when we'd have these alarms where you'd have to crawl under the desk.
Oh, wow.
Like there's impending bombs or something, right? We really had we had these drills. And so I guess what you're suggesting is we need to plan, prepare, and maybe train, especially with kids. So what should our kid do if the house is on fire? What should we do if there were a strange person trying to come through a window or something like that? And not in like a fearful way, but just in a kind of prepared way. Do you do that with your kids?
I do, James, and it's tough because, obviously my experience, the things that I've seen, everything I'm going to talk about today and experience, it's all from calls for service. It's all from investigations I've worked. And of course, I worked in an online undercover capacity for many years. So my kids, unfortunately, have to deal with my hypervigilance. I don't like to use the word paranoia, hypervigilance with their app usage, how they communicate with their friends online, through their cell phone, through their apps. It's a constant struggle. So that's been more of a difficult struggle because that to them is more real. But I have had those discussions, years ago, again, as a police officer, I would be in plain clothes. I would be out with my family. I would see kids. And I remember sort of having to tell my kids, hey, unfortunately, it's the price of doing business as a police officer. We may encounter somebody that recognizes me or wants to say something to me, or perhaps, be a threat. And so my kids and I talked about, hey, if there's ever a time we're out in public and I see something, or I tell you, hey, I need you to go to the car. I need you to do this, right? It's not like, well, why would you do that? I've explained why I would do that.
Right.
In the house, I got to tell you, one of the things that I've had to teach my kids, right, is how to be impolite, right? And so I want to kind of back this up, right? What do you mean by being impolite? And one of the good points, I think, is you think about when somebody knocks on your door, and there's this sort of like immediate sort of, reaction that, hey, common sense says I should answer the door. And that's going to be a good thing, but also going to be a bad thing. I think with kids sometimes, though, there's this fear, right? There's this fear of, well, like, I don't want to answer the door because if I answer the door, my kids are somewhat younger. They are able to stay home with each other by themselves. But there's this fear of like, well, if I answer the door or acknowledge the door, then I'm going to be impolite because I'm not going to open the door, or I'm going to expose that I'm home alone. And so it was really interesting because I had to explain to my kids the thought process of a criminal or somebody that's trying to gain access to your home. And a lot of times it starts with a knock on the door. It starts with just that criminal seeing if somebody's home. And it's interesting because, if somebody is trying to break into your home, typically we do see a knock at the door first, right? Now they're hoping that nobody is home. Well, that's a problem for your kids who, again, obviously during these last times of our last year of COVID times, parents are not necessarily working remotely, but their kids are certainly home alone, and they're going to school remotely. And so I had to kind of lay it down for my kids. Listen, I get that you may not want to answer the door. I get that you may want to acknowledge that, hey, who is it? The problem with that, though, is if you don't acknowledge that person at the door, you may very well be telling that person, that criminal, that, hey, nobody's home. And now they think, right, or they're hoping at least, if they are going to make a decision to enter your home, that they're going to do so to an empty house. And so I kind of had to explain that scenario to my kids. And, it's a little fearful for them, but it goes back to what I said, right? It's okay to be impolite, right? You can acknowledge the door. Right. And if somebody says, well, I'm so-and-so, well, you don't have to do anything more than that. You can say, sorry, not interested. Or, you know what, my dad said, no, we're not. So it's sort of this mindset where some kids are just paralyzed in fear of answering the door. But we almost have to talk to our kids about, no, it's actually important to acknowledge who's there. Impolite as it may be, you're not going to do more than just say, who is it? Or hello. Yeah. I think that's an important variable that parents should be discussing with their kids, and maybe even themselves. Yeah. I don't answer the door sometimes, right? I look at you look at the people and you're like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a salesperson, or this is going to be someone trying to, anything, right? And so you don't answer the door, but sometimes it's actually important impolite as it may be, to at least acknowledge that
Mhm.
person and say, sorry, I'm not interested.
So, so what I'm hearing is, and what I've seen actually in videos, people walking around, like these creepos will be like walking around testing a doorknob or trying to open a window. And you're saying what they're testing then is whether something is unlocked.
It's a little bit of unlocked, from my experience. I just see a lot of people that will just knock at the door.
Mhm.
And, we've seen surveillance. I've watched, countless hours. And even let's say a criminal intends to break in, they'll knock at the front door. They may not necessarily test the door immediately. They just want to start by knocking.
Mhm.
And then if they get no answer,
Right.
maybe to them it's like, well, I'll start checking doors. I'll start checking windows. Maybe I come back in a couple of minutes. Maybe I start making my way to the backyard. You don't quite know what their plan is.
Mhm.
But I've seen videos. I've encountered witnesses who answered the door. And
Mhm.
when they answered the door, the person said, oh, I'm looking for Felix. Right? I mean, just a made up name. And, of course, the homeowner goes, well, there's no Felix here. And the person says, oh, sorry, wrong house. And they walk away.
Mhm.
It could be as simple as that, right? That person basically, was prepared to say, okay, well, if somebody answers, I'll give a fake name. And, maybe that doesn't draw any more suspicion. Maybe it's not, right? Maybe it truly is wrong house. In this day and age, though, I mean, not likely, right? How many
Right.
people knock on your house looking for the
Yeah.
wrong person?
I've once made the mistake where someone was knocking on the door and I opened the door ajar and the person forced his way in.
Wow.
So I made the mistake. I acknowledged the person was there, I answered it, and I opened it, like, how may I help you type thing. And the person actually forced his way in. So that was a big learning point for me. Just because I'm acknowledging who's at the door or saying hello to that person doesn't mean I have to actually open it a little bit to do that, right?
Right. And James, it kind of goes back to the point, right? It's okay to be impolite, right? We as a society want to do that. You acknowledge who's at the door. The person says, well, my name is John. And you're like, okay, like I'll open the door, because now it's like that's almost the expected next step. And that's sort of the mindset that even an adult has to take on. It's like, no, you know what? I'm going to talk to you through a door. Or I don't feel comfortable opening the door. State your business through the door. It's like, oh, I hate to be impolite. But you almost have to be in this day and age.
Yeah. What are some of the things that we can do as homeowners to just kind of project that we're less vulnerable than maybe the other house down the street?
Yeah, we've talked about this at great length. For me, I am really big about simple changes, right? And so, landscape lighting, it sounds so simple. And yet, I see a lot of my neighbors on my street and they either don't have it or the lights turn off rather early in the evening. You got to remember the criminal element, right? They want to, if you will, lurk in the cloak of darkness, if you will. They want to target a home. They want to approach a vehicle in the driveway that there's no lighting.
Mhm.
And so, for me, it always starts with good lighting, but also running that lighting very much into the, 3-4 o'clock in the morning. Another thing too is, it's not necessarily, when we think about, burglaries and we think about people violating your personal space, oftentimes it can start with just your vehicle in the driveway. And I'll tell you, this is going to segue into a really great tip. And this is something that my wife and I still have to kind of get on her about. But, not every criminal is trying to get into your home. They could just be walking up and down your street, checking door handles, trying to get into your vehicle. What's their expectation? Is it the change in your door handle? Is it is it maybe a laptop or a bag you left behind? You don't really know. But obviously something as simple as locking your door to your vehicles, parking in the garage. James, I'll tell you a big one right now. And again, everything I talk about goes back from, to experience working either the patrol level or at the investigative level. But we're seeing criminals now who not only will, find an unlocked door to your vehicle, but if you have a garage door opener on your visor, they are clicking that button, and it could be 2 o'clock in the morning. Imagine hearing your garage door roll up. So whether or not you park in the garage or you don't, I go back to the conversations my wife and I have to remind her, like, hey, if you parked in the driveway, make sure you don't leave your garage door open or clipped to your visor, because again, you can secure your house all you want, but if you leave your garage door opener and they gain access to that sense, Are they trying to get into your home? Are they trying to get into your garage? You won't know. That's a scary thing, though. Imagine hearing your garage door open at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. So light it up, because bad guys are like cockroaches, right? They prefer to operate in the dark. So you like putting the floodlights up, maybe motion sensitive lighting. Just keep it all lit up. Think about those weak links, like the car parked in front. You might not worry about it because it's not inside the home, but make sure it's all locked up and doesn't have easy access into the home, like the garage openers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I certainly don't want to give the impression that I've got like, a beacon of light. You look at my house and it's like the Clark Griswold house, which is, but I mean, it's sensible decisions, right? Making sure that your coach lights are working, making sure that you don't necessarily turn off your front porch light until, and I've got home automation throughout mine. So it's been fairly easy because everything just happens with the click of a button or setting a timer and leaving it. But yeah, I'm a big advocate of proper lighting, and I have surveillance as well. It's interesting because you mentioned the motion sensors, and I have motion sensors. But one of the things that's interesting about the motion sensors is I'm seeing, and of course, if you are part of your neighborhood watches on your Facebook, or if you are in the Nextdoor app, you'll see a lot of surveillance footage where criminals are now they're more understanding to these motion-based lights, right? There's this thought process where, if a bad guy approaches your driveway and this light pops on, that they're going to immediately just walk away or scurry away. And I think in reality, the bad guys are kind of counting on, well, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and a light went on, maybe there's a notification that went to somebody, but I'm just looking to see how fast I can get in and get out of this car. And so, again, I don't want to minimize the importance of that motion-based lighting or cameras, but at the very end of the day, you should make sure that you're not relying solely on that, and that simple practices like locking your doors, parking your car in the garage if possible. Honestly, I've got 2 kids. I love them. I have to remind them to make sure that they've locked the back door or they've locked the front door. I have to kind of make the extra check because at the end of the day, kids are kids. And I have to kind of be the responsible homeowner and making sure that everything's locked up. So that's kind of a routine that we have.
You sweep the house when everyone's getting ready for bed. You sweep the house, make sure you test all the handles, make sure the doors are locked.
Yeah, because we have front security gates, and so we're in this great sort of weather where it's nice to leave our traditional doors open. We've got French doors, so it's nice to leave one of those open. So at the very least, I got to make sure that security gate is secured. And so, yeah, that's something that's kind of like every night it's like a mindset. And I'm not saying that, our viewers or our attendees don't have that same mindset. But again, at the end of the day, that's what the bad guy is looking for, right? The path of least resistance, an unlocked door, a back security gate that doesn't have a lock on it, can just swing open, and those are things that minimal, small changes, very cost efficient to make those upgrades.
Yeah, Elena, I want you to keep the noise down over there. You're really talking too much. But I'm glad you're here because a perspective from your side may be different than ours, right? I think and this is maybe stereotypical. The comments we see online, when we show a video of someone trying to breach, it's not uncommon for the male to say, well, bring it on, right? I'm ready for them, right? I'm locked and loaded, right? And the female perspective is different than that. And that's why typically I wanted to hear a bit more from Elena in terms of her concerns about security.
Well, for me, I actually know 100% that chances of me defending myself successfully in a combat, direct combat, are not great. So
you're small and weak.
Yeah, no. So I don't actually open the door. So if somebody comes over, we have the security screens, and before that, we had security door. So I'll just walk up and I'll look through it. I also have a benefit of being an immigrant and an outsider, even though I've been in America for 20 years, but I wasn't brought up in a culture to be polite, right? So it was not like, I think Americans are very much, mothers teach their children to be nice. It's like, be nice, be nice, be nice. And I think as we brainwash our children over the years, then they really want to be nice. They really want to be polite. Well, that doesn't happen necessarily to that extent with Russians, right? It was Soviet and post-Soviet space. It's like, we're also nice, but that's not a default setting where if somebody knocks on your door, you automatically pop out, so
Interesting.
so I can see from the outside, there's a bit of a cultural thing where I can be okay with not opening the door for someone. So let's see. I do feel like the most critical element is not to have anybody in my house to begin with, like in terms of intrusions, as opposed to dealing with them on the inside. The other day we watched Home Alone, and it seems like a lot of fun, but that's like my worst case scenario, having a little kid trying to defend himself against somebody who's in the house. And funnily enough, like, I don't know how old is that movie, like 30 years old, 40 years? I don't know, 30 probably, or 20.
1990 it came out, 1990.
Yeah, well, he's a movie buff. Yeah, he knows.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yes, amazingly, as you guys were talking about, like automatic, lights going off and stuff. They had that. And if you remember, there was one scene where all the neighbors' Christmas lights were going automatically, and all these burglars are sitting in the van, and they already know that, right? They thought it through.
Yeah, exactly.
And most people don't give a lot of thought to that, but actually those guys whose job it is to rob your house, they actually did think it through. They are familiar with technology, probably better than we are, and they know how to disable it and how to deal with it. So I think I just don't want them in the house, period. And the other options of, for example, we have a dog, and it's definitely making a lot of noise, but it could be taken out pretty easily, just like me. So both of us want to stay on the other side of the door. But then, of course, moving past the home invasions, and we have a lot of violence against especially Asian women. Somehow these cowards, they don't really attack the men, especially young, healthy men. They don't want to be, karate chopped or just destroyed on the spot. So they go after women. And I've probably in all the years, in like 2 decades in the US, there's probably like 2-3 times where people would kind of harass me like openly.
Wow.
And I would actually confront them. And I think what's interesting to me, it was like the complete sense of shock and surprise, because they expect me to kind of scurry away. So when I actually stop on my tracks, turn around and walk up right to them and be like, can I help you? Is there a problem or an issue? They completely just melt down. So that was my experience, because I'm trying to like disabuse them of that notion that you can do that to an Asian woman and get away with it. So they need to really be, or like this like older Asian woman who was like who knocked somebody out. I think she was on all the news, right? We need to do more of that. Just kind of confront them with a direct, I don't want to say violence, but like a strong pushback. And I feel like if people who are not Asian women and not elderly Asian women, if you see that out in the wild, go ahead and walk up to those people, and you don't have to be violent, like you just be firm. It's just like same thing as when it applies to bullying, right? It's one of the tips. Like James has a book on bullying and for children. How do you confront them? What stops bullying? And actually research shows that just one person standing up,
right,
for this person who's being abused is enough to kind of stop the bully, right? So it's the same principle. Like we need to stand up for ourselves as Asians and as Asian women especially. And I think if there's a community who's supportive of us, who can just, say, hey, this is not cool, stop it, right? And then that's pretty much enough. Because those people, they're not the bravest. They're not the smartest, but at the same time, they're not the most courageous people either. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this. So it doesn't take a lot to stop them. But I do feel like if there's a person like that, who's a coward or a bully and also a racist, but at the same time deranged, could be on alcohol or drugs, like methamphetamines or something, so they don't really assess what they're doing really well, then what am I going to do, right? So I have to be, I hate to say that, but I have to be like extra vigilant when I'm out and about, walking around, especially if it's getting darker. I'm walking up to my car. I went shopping the other day, and on the way back, it's a huge like parking facility, like 6 stories. There's a lot of cars, but there's not a lot of people, right? What am I going to do? So I have to like think through something like, and when it does happen, if somebody does attack me, like I better have some sort of plan in motion. Otherwise there's not much I can do, right? As is. So that's sort of where I'm thinking. I think the safest thing to do is not be in that position at all, like not be in the parking lot by yourself in the middle of the night.
Right.
I've attended like networking events for women downtown Las Vegas, and on the way back, it was getting dark, and I was just walking across the streets, through the different random parking lots. And I think I was very fortunate. I made a mental note, do not ever be in this position again, right? Like, this is you just putting yourself out there. It's kind of like, we used to live in Hawaii, and if there's an ocean, if you throw yourself into the ocean, right, in the middle of the night, and you just swim out there into that territory of where there's all kinds of creatures, it's on you then if the shark ends up eating you for breakfast or for dinner, right? So you gotta kind of remember about where you're placing yourself in. I mean, that's how I view it, and I'm not always successful, but so far nobody murdered me, so I think that worked to some extent.
Well, one of the things, Elena, I like that you mentioned, and again, this goes beyond the home, right? It's safety tips in general. You talked about, walking to your car and kind of having that plan. I think it's one of the things, and obviously, you're a very confident woman. I think it's one of the things we got to talk to our kids about as well. I mean, how many times do we see kids just completely buried in their phone? They're walking, they're texting, they have no real situation awareness. And that's something as a parent that I've had to really work on with my kids, because, you give them a device, they're going to use it more than we are ever going to use it. And so I've had to talk to my daughter in particular and say, listen, when you're going from point A to point B, you can't be walking, you can't be on your cell phone, because, again, if a bad guy is out there looking to target somebody with ease, right, they want somebody who's oblivious as to where they're going, they're fumbling for their keys, they're not even really getting into their car, they're actively texting with both hands. And so I like that you mentioned that you're kind of, you're very situationally aware, your head's on a swivel, and you're vigilant. And that's really important. And I think I would like to think that a lot of adults do have that mindset. It's actually it's the teenagers, it's the kids that maybe have never, my kids don't watch the news, right? So the only exposure they have to these horrible events that you're talking about, and obviously, it's absolutely horrific as to what's going on right now, right? You see these hate crimes that are occurring across the nation. It's just horrific. Yeah. But how much do our kids really know about these events, right? Do we as parents shield that from our kids? And it's almost like, you have to make a decision. How much do you really talk about these horrible events to our kids? And you have to, I think, broach the topic, right? You have to at least say, listen, you got to be careful, when you're doing this, or you got to be more aware, because this is what could happen. And so that's kind of the scary thing is, as parents in today's society, we can no longer hide these horrible events, from our kids. We have to be a little bit more forthcoming and tell them why we're explaining these horrific things that may be happening out in the real world.
I wasn't very good about that. And I think it's a really difficult subject because my 8-year-old, for example, he's just learned about racists, and he's half and half, half white, half Asian. I don't know how I would tell him, like, listen, just because you're Asian, there's some people who's going to try to kill you or punch you or something, or hurt you. So his immediate reaction would be like, actually, I'm going to try to hurt them myself. Right. So it's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
But I also had a really hard time when they had mass shootings, especially the ones in Las Vegas. And I remember I was picking him up from elementary school, and I was thinking, this is my worst nightmare. I actually ended up pulling him from school altogether. He's been homeschooled for a couple of years now, because I know chances of that happening are extremely small, but I couldn't bring myself to think how he would do on his own, in a terrified kind of state, and everybody's being murdered, people are running around. I think I just don't want that kind of memory for him at all. And I didn't even know how to explain to him. He didn't know what was going on when I was picking him up. They just both kids saw the flag at half-mast, and they're like, "Oh, what's happening?" And I really didn't know how to explain that. So my reaction to just pull him away from that and just keep him at home, which is a shame because he's a very social kid, right? So at the same time, would I rather his social skills to suffer? Would I rather him being murdered someday in his elementary school class? So, however, if he does go back to school, what are the tips? What should we do as parents besides explaining, hey, by the way, if you see a guy with a samurai sword or a gun walking around the hallway, try to move away from that. But what can we do? Because it seems to be getting more and more frequent, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, did you ever think you'd have to have a discussion like this with your kids, and I completely empathize with sort of the struggle of how do you relay this what's now a normal trend in our society as far as mass shootings. I'm actually a part-time instructor for the College of Southern Nevada here. And I never thought in a million years that I would have to, at the very beginning of a semester, remind students where the exits are, remind them what to do if there were to ever be an active shooter, And so, it's tough. I do like that schools over the past years have really changed their policies on students having cell phones. You remember when cell phones first sort of were out and schools were completely like, you cannot have that cell phone. Now, they're obviously, they have guidelines and rules regarding when you can use that device. But I like the idea that my daughter, she's a junior high kid. I like the fact that she's got her cell phone. It's tough, Elena. I wish I had the answer to give you. I think, even when our kids went back to school this week, it's something that my wife and I, it's one of our biggest fears. And obviously the younger your child is, the more vulnerable they are. I think it really that's a bigger social issue. One of the things that I have held the school district to is the higher standards of security. I'm really impressed of recent, having gone to my daughter's junior high, having gone to my son's elementary school. I'm really impressed by the security protocols that have rolled out. No one's getting past, that front office area. I'm seeing doors that are locked. And so one of the things that I think that you can do, or any other parent, is really hold your child's school to that standard. Ask those hard questions, like how, for example, at my daughter's school, they have to wear lanyards. And if you don't have a lanyard, you're going to be in trouble. And, my daughter's friends have gotten in trouble for not having that lanyard. Now, they don't quite grasp, it's just a lanyard, Dad. I'm like, but you understand, that's how the school, right? When they look at somebody, they immediately know whether they belong or they don't belong. And so, Elena, I would kind of go back to, holding, your child's school to that standard, right? Asking those questions. I think often we as parents just assume that there's protocols in place. We don't know what those protocols are. And so I think just asking the hard questions is really where it begins to offer you, if any, peace of mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a person in that I once met. His business was basically consulting schools on safety. And that was maybe a couple of years ago. So it wasn't as bad, I feel like, as it is today. He was doing a structural assessment to see how really, and the protocols. So I asked him, so how safe are the schools? And he was just he didn't give me the answer I was really hoping for. And when I was picking him up from school, I was always they do have that front desk area and they have the doors that kind of lock automatically.
Sure.
But at the same time, there's a regular glass. So all he has to do is just shoot through the glass.
At BOSS, we do see more interest from schools in the security screens as a way to kind of manage this situation. In fact, the school district in Texas just purchased a couple thousand screens for that purpose, just to mitigate the risks. So I think in the end, what we're all saying is, it's kind of a rough and tumble world and it can be dangerous. And we want to equip our kids to be independent, kind of autonomous, young, fine adults. And we want to do it at the right time. We don't want to do it too soon to spoil, all that innocence. But at the same time, we don't want to release them into the wild, unable to stand up for themselves. And all of us agree that there are really two modalities. One is where we're surrounded by threats and we kind of cower in fear. And it's a terrible way to live. Or we kind of take a prudent, sensible approach towards security, and we equip ourselves with the skills and the confidence or whatever to stand up to that, kind of like how Elena stands up to those bullies, right? So, and that really is the purpose of these, of what we're doing as a company and in these presentations is how can we, approach this world in a way that is upbeat. We don't want to lock ourselves into the home and not be able to live fulfilling lives. But at the same time, we don't want to do dumb things, put ourselves in a situation where, we could get hurt or injured just because out of ignorance. So
you've hit it on the head, James. It's really a balancing act in today's society, right? I mean, how much do we expose our kids and our family to the truth of what could happen out there? And by doing so, do we basically paralyze them in fear? And we don't want that as well. So it's a balance. And I'll tell you, as a parent, on top of being former law enforcement, it's even more of a struggle for my wife and I, because we don't want to scare our kids, but we want them to really be understanding of what's going on in the world. And so, yeah, it's really tough. I mean, it's a bigger topic, right? I mean, it's not just home security. It's going to school, it's going to your workplace and feeling safe. One of the things that I've seen is when traumatic events happen, and Elena, you mentioned, right, just walking to your vehicle, and you have mentioned you've experienced some just horrific things said to you, or people approached you, based on your race. One of the things that happens is, even if the event that happened to you outside of your home, you immediately think about, well, I want to be safe in my home, right? And so that's kind of the focus, that I talk about with friends and family and colleagues. It's like, I understand why a mass shooting, or I understand why something in the news would really get you thinking about, well, at the very least, I want to be safe in my home. And, that's what I'm eager to collaborate, with James with, is really just these tips, because there are a lot of things that I think individuals don't think about on a daily basis. And
so you want to get into some of those right now?
Yeah. So let me go, again, I talk about prior experience with calls and investigations. I'll tell you a quick story. It really changed my thought process about registration and insurance, right? We'll start off with that. So years ago, I remember as a young patrol officer, a little bit less gray hair, still somewhat distinguished. I remember responding to a local casino in Henderson, reference somebody's car being stolen. And it was just the nicest lady ever. I mean, think about a somewhat older lady. She was there to play bingo. She had this, big brown purse full of bingo daubers. Right? I remember the call like it was yesterday. And so she comes out from playing bingo, and her car had been stolen. And so, I'm taking the information. Obviously, in that type of situation, we're just going to put the vehicle into our local database. So obviously, if it's discovered, we'll know it's stolen. And so I'm talking to her, and she had her keys with her, so she didn't quite know how her vehicle was stolen. But not uncommon for people to steal a vehicle without keys. And this is the eye opener. A couple of hours later into my shift, I get another call for service. I wasn't on this call, but I see the same lady's name, and now she's at home reporting a burglary. So I'm like, what's going on here, right? Sure enough, the individual who had stolen her car, right? I mean, that was the worst part of her day at that point. Well, when she actually gets a ride home, it turns out the criminal who'd stolen her car, guess where he went thereafter, right? He went right to her home, and in the criminal's mindset, he probably felt confident that nobody was going to be home because he stole the car from a local casino parking lot. And how do you think he gained access, right, to the garage, right? Was that garage door opener? And how do you think that he knew where to even go? It was it was the registration insurance in the vehicle. That call happened more than, maybe 10 plus years ago, maybe longer. That call, you talk about a lasting effect, right? It really changed how I leave information in my vehicle. Now, the obvious question is, well, Wayne, you have to have your registration and insurance in your vehicle. And I say, no, you don't. You have to have it with you when you're driving. And so something as simple as that call, I, along with my wife and our family and, everybody I talk to about the story, I encourage people, you wouldn't think if your car got stolen from a parking lot that somebody would have the mindset to then go to your house and try to target your home. That's unfortunately what's happening. And so something as simple as not leaving your registration and your insurance, not leaving any identifying information about where you live in your car could really, thwart those efforts. And so, yeah, that's something that I've, kind of been talking about with students, and I've done other presentations. And, you typically see, James, I saw your eyes kind of go up, right? I mean, it's like, wow, like, registration insurance in my wallet, or Elena, registration insurance in your purse, not necessarily in your car. That to me is really something, again, it's never happened to me, but I just remember experiencing that call for service. And I always pass along that story because, again, you're no longer finding criminals who just want to get into your car or take it. They're looking for perhaps a bigger score than that.
Wow. I'm, I wonder if there's a true sentiment where if there is if you project the confidence, for example, like outside, right, you're going to be less likely to be mugged, right? But is there something how you can project like some sense of like more fortified house, or like what can you do to deter people from even thinking about breaking in? Like is it true like if you stick like a alarm sign in the lawn, or have like a beware of dog, or some, like what are some of the tips that actually work in real life?
It's a great question, and I love the segue because I've actually had this very discussion with my kids. As working adults, my wife and I, there was, my kids were a little nervous the first couple times we left them home, and we didn't want to, but the very logistics, it had to happen. And so one of the things that I had to express to my kids was, listen, anything's possible, but look at some of the things that we've done to really minimize that risk, right? And so we have security screens on our door. And one of the things that I did was I brought my kids outside. And of course, it was like, oh, Dad, Dad's doing his cop thing again, right? But I bring my kids out to the street and I tell them, so I want you to look at our house. And then I want you to look at neighbors, right? Both sides of the street. And I want you to tell you, which one do you think is going to be more difficult to break in? And they didn't quite grasp that concept. But then I began to point things out. I'm like, okay, do you see the security doors on our house, right? Do you see that we've got visible surveillance cameras on the exterior of our home, right? Things like that, that's also the mindset of a criminal. So Elena, you hit it on the head, whether or not you have an alarm or not, sometimes just that sticker in the window, sometimes just that little placard in front of your house could really, make a bad guy think twice. For me, I mean, it's fortification, right? So it's security doors. It's a product like BOSs security screens. It's cameras. It's great lighting. It's not parking your car in the driveway unless you have to. It's really the foundation. Elaine, I wanted to ask you a question earlier. You had mentioned, we talked about what would you do if somebody was in your home. Let me ask you a question, Elena, and for our viewers as well. What would you do if you had surveillance cameras, right, and you heard something in your house? Would you immediately go check and investigate what that strange noise is, or would you turn to your phone? Would you look at the app, or would you look at the cameras on your phone?
I would definitely not go. I've watched enough like horror movies that I'm definitely not investigating that. What I did is I went and talked to my husband, and I was like, when you're not, because when he's at home, I'm not worried about it. He has like a 4th-degree black belt. He's a security expert, all these other things. So I can, like, if there's a noise, he'll go investigate that, right? And he's fine. But if I'm by myself, like what I did is actually talk to him, and I was like, you got to do something that I don't have to worry about it. And so we went through these options, like, what about a gun? What about a dog? What about the alarm, right? And so I really didn't have good options, because the gun, I actually know how to use a gun, and I'm mentally prepared to actually defend myself. And I know from law school experience that if somebody's in your house in the middle of the night, you're allowed to just take them out. And I think I'm willing to do that, especially if there's children. They're my children outside, like inside the house, or anybody else I care for, right? So I want to protect my life and my home, but I really don't want to do this either. So what I would probably do, I would call 911.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I would probably call my husband first of all, if he's not at home. But if not, then I would call 911. Have them deal with that. Have actual police officers and professionals. We have animals at home, and we have a cat. So sometimes he makes a noise, right? He tries to open the doors. Sometimes he would he's weird. He would jiggle the door handle. So I have to really understand what all the noises are that are happening regularly downstairs. So if there's something unusual, I know something is wrong. I actually had a friend of mine in California. She had 2 little girls, and when her husband was away, somebody broke into the home, some meth or crackhead or something. He took a lawn chair, and he smashed the patio door, like the glass door, and went in. And he took an axe, and he was trying to chop his way. Like they went into the bedroom, went to the closet, locked the door, and he was trying to chop his way through the wall. And he was on Facebook posting messages like, this person's trying to murder me, right? And my kids, oh my God, like she called 911, and she posted the actual like video, surveillance video of the guy doing this afterwards. And there was blood everywhere. He ruined her favorite like nightgown, and there's and sheets and the house. And it's surreal. So I think, the best thing to do is call 911. And we had a discussion with another police detective last weekend, and I was like, I would be hesitant to call 911 because I don't want to sound stupid, but he's like, don't, just like, we love going out and helping people, and I'd rather you call us and that would be false alarm than, something bad happening. So now that gives me additional peace of mind of actually calling 911. The only issue sometimes with making those calls is that I feel like police department is probably overwhelmed with the amount of crime happening, and so I'm not sure how fast they can actually come out. We had a client, I have a maid service, and we had a vacation rental house that when the maids showed up, they noticed there's a burglary in process in the broad daylight, because the criminals know that there is actually a vacation rental home. And so sometimes people are not there. So it would get robbed like multiple times, not just one time. And one time it was while we were there, like they approached. And so they freaked out. They called 911. And I think it's been like probably, I can't remember. It's been like 40 minutes before the police was able to come out. I mean, they said like stay away and make sure, don't go in, right? And stuff like that. But that made me think, like, if I were to call 911, how fast would they actually come? I know that fire department, and if you call with a cardiac arrest or something, they come out pretty much instantly, right? But police, I don't know.
It's a great point. I mean, the how calls are prioritized. Typically, if you came home and you suspected your home had been burglarized and you call 911, the questions that the call taker may ask is, are you currently in the home? Are you currently in real danger? That might dictate, the delayed response time, because you're not actively in danger, and the calls for service are always based on priority. Now, if you're home, if you're in home and somebody's actively breaking in, I feel confident that the call for service would be elevated to a higher level, and that officer is going to immediately get there. One thing I want to bring up, Elena, and we go back to just experience. I bet either of you didn't know, and I think our viewers might be surprised to know, but did you know in Clark County they have begun rolling out the text ability to 911? This to me, This to me is really a game changer, and I got to give a shout out to my former police department, the Henderson Police Department. They were one of the first agencies in Nevada to roll this feature out, and essentially it's just what it sounds like. You are now able to text 911, right? So I would ask our viewers, did you know that? Because to me, you think about if you're home alone and you do hear that sound downstairs and you're paralyzed in fear, and maybe you have surveillance cameras, maybe you see something that should not be there. Obviously calling 911 is a priority, but I mean, wouldn't the ability to text 911 be just as more important? And so that's huge. I mean, that's something that we've had to talk to my kids about, right? I mean, imagine, kids thinking that they have to make a physical phone call. And so this program in Southern Nevada, which is Clark County, Metro is rolling it out, North Las Vegas. So all the major agencies are rolling out this new feature. And it's really catching on throughout the country as well. And so I know we've got some viewers that'll be watching from other states.
That's a great idea. Does it triangulate the location? So let's say I'm able to send out a text, I'm hiding in the closet. Does it capture locational information, or do I also need to text that?
So there's a couple of variables. When you call 911, more often than not, the call taker, the agency is able to track your real-time location because of that physical phone call. What's happening with the technology regarding text 911, because your phone number is displayed, there is some real-time research the call taker can do. But obviously, you would want to state your emergency, state your address. Because here's the deal, your phone number might be associated with your address. And if you're making a text, that may not come across as far as real-time tracking. So you'd always want to relay your current location. So I'm not exactly sure if a text message can convey your real-time location. But even if it could, I mean, if you're in an office building, I don't think it would convey what floor you're on, what room you're in, right?
Hiding in the closet type thing,
exactly, right? So again, not to scare our kids, not to scare our loved ones, but this is also a conversation that should take place. Like, hey, kids, did you know you could text 911, right? Did you know that this is something you should do? And so you had better obviously know your address. You had better be able to state what's going on. And it's amazing how fast we can text today, right? So maybe even more efficient than actually making the physical phone call, And
then the 911 dispatcher is able to text back?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
What do you suggest? So let's say I'm at home by myself or with kids, and let's say it's the middle of the night and there's a noise downstairs, right? And then it seems like actually somebody tries to break through the door. And let's say I don't have security screens or any fancy like machinery to protect me, or a dog or a weapon. What are the, like, what should I do? You know, like first of all, of course, call 911, and then what? Where should I go? Lock myself, or like what's the protocol? What's the optimal behavior?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I'm just going off of my experience as a parent. I've got 2 kids in the house. Let's say I'm able to, confirm that somebody's actively either trying to break in or is already in my home. As a parent, I think everybody's first reaction is going to be get right to their kids. Obviously, if your kids are in different bedrooms, you may have to, tell your kid to get up, or you may have to go into one bedroom and bring another kid in there. But absolutely, I mean, I think multitasking is really going to be important, right? You're either texting 911, you're calling 911, and you are essentially fortifying yourself in that bedroom. Are you putting a chair in front of the door? Are you putting a piece of furniture? I think that is the first step. I also go back to, sometimes we're often paralyzed in fear, but maybe that bad guy is breaking in, doesn't realize the noise he's making. Maybe he doesn't realize that that he's there. And so, it's kind of a personal decision. Do you yell out? Do you yell out, James, get the gun? Or, I know that you're in the home, the police have been called. Maybe something like announcing yourself. It's really a decision you have to make. I also think it has to do with the size of your home, right? If you live in a smaller home, you may be comfortable yelling down, like, I know you're there, the police have been called. If you live in a bigger home, you actually might be more fearful because you don't know exactly where they're at. Yeah. For me, I kind of go back to some things that I've implemented in my life, security cameras. I don't want to live under the watchful eye of a camera, but we do have security cameras in my home. My kids have the app. We can actually pull it up on our TV and see a real time. I'm sorry?
Inside or outside of the home?
We have them inside and outside. And I'll tell you, when I first got surveillance cameras installed, my wife wasn't really thrilled. She didn't like the idea of like cameras inside of her home. And these are not cameras that are in, any personal spaces. But for me, my goal was, let me get a few cameras inside of the home that face entry points. So our backsliding door, our family room that has a series of windows, our front double doors, right? That was kind of my focus. I don't have any intention of putting cameras at the living area upstairs of our home. But it sure is nice that if you hear something like you mentioned, it could be your cat, it could be an ice maker, it could be, a windy night. And so there's more unusual noises. I personally like being able to quickly pull up my application and seeing my cameras real time, before maybe I make the decision of calling 911 or grabbing my kids. And so, knowledge, of course, in this situation is always important. I got to tell you, cameras, James, I'm excited down the road to talk about this. We've mentioned it sort of in passing. I really do think, in addition to fortifying your home with a great product like you offer, cameras should also, be involved in your decision to protect your home. What a great way to see what's going on when you're not there.
What cameras do you have at your home? You use Arlo or Nest cameras?
Yeah, so I have I'm using a little bit of both. So I have a camera system in my home. It was installed by a professional installer. Some of the variables when you buy cameras is how do you run power to those cameras? How do you store your recorded footage? So these are all kind of decisions you have to make. And of course, depending on what you're looking for is where the price options. Now I do have Arlo cameras as well. These things have just been phenomenal. They're battery powered. The battery life is super impressive. And more importantly, they have a free version, right? So you're not paying a monthly subscription, which is really important when I recommend products to my friends and family. I don't want to, mention something or promote a product that's going to, cost you this, ever reoccurring monthly fee. So there's some great options out there. And, but yeah, I've got personal experience with quite a few cameras out there. And so I'd love for that to be a topic,
Yeah, let's keep that as a topic for the next live. I think that's there's a lot of good talking points there about what kind of solution would fit best for what person. There are 3 things I wanted to underscore in all the conversations we've had. The first is studies show that when there's a plane crash, for example, there's a moment where everyone kind of herd mentality, they realize something happened, but they're not sure what they should do. And they sit there kind of paralyzed until one person takes action. And then everyone else jumps up and takes action, right? So the thing that I would reiterate is that if there is a problem, that you take action right away, don't delay. And I like what you suggested about don't be afraid to ask for help. Call 911, right? Or text them.
Absolutely.
Now you can text them right away. And then the third would be, Elena carries herself with confidence, and we've discussed this a few times. She feels that some of these people who are responsible for hate crimes are really, not willing to stand up for themselves. And I don't feel that way. I feel like any threat, whether it's in your home or on the street, even if that threat appears to be small and weak and, a small threat, we should always treat it as if treat every mouse as if it's a lion. Because you never really know.
Yeah,
right?
good point.
That person that doesn't seem like they're going to do anything if you talk back to them may just do something. And all it takes is one person to do one thing to ruin the whole day. So those are the three things. If something seems like it's going south, take action right away. Be the first to do it. Don't be afraid to ask for help because you'll need it. And then treat every threat, even if it looks like a mouse, treat it like a lion. Worst case is kind of.
Yeah, I had a security tip for children from I guess post-Soviet space and time when everything broke down as a chaos and lawlessness on the street. So like a post-apocalyptic scenario. My dad told me when I was a little girl that if someone will ever harm you, I will find that person and I'll just completely destroy them. No matter whether, even if they're going to end up in prison, they're gone, right? So I had a very strong understanding of that no one's supposed to hurt me as a child, and even to this day. Yeah. And my dad is 70 now, over 70, and I still believe that's the case, that something wherever to happen to me, he will have probably killed that person. I don't know, like it's not gonna be pretty for sure. And I think that alone really helped me with just knowing that there are people, like even as a child and even as an adult, that you're entitled to your bodily integrity, you're entitled to freedom, you're entitled to not be harmed. You should be entitled to feel safe in your home. You should feel like that's your right to be safe on the street, and that's your right to be especially safe in your home. And I feel like if we don't have that, that's a horrible way to live.
Right.
Shame. But perhaps just telling your children that, by the way, this is completely wrong, and I would do everything in my power to make sure that person gets punished. So they have that in their eyes, sort of like, so criminals can read it off their face.
But it shouldn't translate into a license to be,
up to a car full of men, like, can I help you?
Because I know that my wife is going to kill you isn't going to stop me from being killed, right? So it's nice to have that. It's very powerful to have that support structure. But like you said, when you're walking from that event in Las Vegas, it's dark out, Mr. Miyagi, you don't want to be anywhere where the punch is at. The best way not to get hit is not to be anywhere where the punch is at. So even though I have that support structure, I still don't want to be anywhere where that punch is, right? So that's anyway, this is a great time now to wrap this thing up. Wayne, this has been awesome. Thanks so much. And let's do the security camera maybe next weekend, same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would, ask of any viewers out there or anybody that's watching this, throw some questions our way, because I'm going to try to cover some great ideas and great topics, but we'd love to hear back from you as well. What kind of concerns, what kind of systems are working for you? And so it'd be great to have a great discussion, but with also some feedback. And so, of course, Elena, I want to thank you for being with me today. I was, excited to hear your perspective as well. And James, once again, super, super pleased that you invited me to speak with you. And I hope to be able to connect with viewers down the road as well.
Yeah, thanks for everyone. And we'll see you this time next week.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah. Bye.